Welcome to Earth Impulse.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'll do a real quick introduction, Randy, and then I'm going to pretty much hand it over to you.
Oh, no.
I want to introduce you to Jeffrey Sewell. Neither of you have met before.
It's true.
Jeffrey's really last big marathon presentation was on the same subject we're going to be talking about today, which is the predatory parasitical aspect of artificial intelligence. And Jeffrey has a website called cytocosmos.com. He's known as the metabiologist, and he'll be bringing in some views of metabiology. We did such a marathon with Alfred Lambrot that we went 10 hours.
Right.
Maybe today we can bring it into some really sharp focus here.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important when we talk about something like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, the aspects of what's happening on our internet right now, that we also present solutions. So I'm Christine of Earth Impasse, Claudia Ayaz of Earth Impasse, and Randy Maugans, you're the man of Off Planet Radio.
No, actually, I'm probably the least among my peers here in terms of speaking to this subject, because I don't really come at it from a technical perspective so much as I do from the epistemology, the philosophy, and the spiritual side of it. And I know Jeffrey covers a lot of this as well when he also overlaps that into the metabiology. It's a technological issue, but it is an issue that goes to the core of who we are. And the biggest issue that we have right now is that we have come onto this world, this planet, this plane, however you visualize this construct that we live in, as what is basically called tabula rasa, which means blank. I believe most of us agree that we are eternal beings, that we have been here in many other places many times, and that a lot of what we're dealing with is a spiritual warfare aspect of what is happening to us as we go through endless lifetime cycles. So we talk about the matrix. That's one construct that's kind of it's a package, a container for people to understand we're inside of a field, that we're inside of something that's artificial, that is constructed around us and designed to containerize us energetically, spiritually, intellectually, and in all other capacities. So a lot of this discussion branches off in almost any direction you want to go. And what it comes back to in the end is, what do we do about this? How do we get ourselves to a place where the concept of being overtaken by an AI is not fearful to us? Because fear really is the one thing that is destroying us collectively and individually right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. So maybe we won't get into well, Jeffrey, I know you know quite a bit about it too, quantum computing, quantum field mechanics, and also physics of it. So what started this quest today was looking at a video by a man named Georgie Rose, who is one of the inventors or brains behind the D-Wave quantum computer that was purchased by Google and NASA. During the 19-minute presentation that he's giving on stage to some very well-heeled people, he literally says, and I'm watching his eyes and I'm watching his own neurolinguistics. This is how we're all communicating right now. We're all in neurolinguistic programs. We're all understanding. We're looking deeper into the field. And so when we're talking, that's what I'm seeing. I'm not just listening to this. And He says during that time, in that moment, he says, when you get up close to one of these things, it's like standing on the altar next to an alien god. Well, when I heard him say that, that just made me sit back in my chair and go, what are we talking about here? All right, what is this thing? They're talking about computing in the quantum field. That means that they're running parallel dimensions, parallel timelines. And he says in something like 2023, this thing, this computer that is really artificial intelligence will be smarter, faster than any human here. So I go compressing inside myself, and I ask this question: if that's happening, what is it I, human, organic I, human, divine being, needs to realize here as I'm hearing this? And it triggered me immediately to you, Jeffrey, because just the day before or so we had that conversation where we were spontaneously again talking about a predator, a parasite. We can call them the archon. We can call this thing by many names, but it's definitely a parasitical entity at this point on our planet that's trying to take a body. So I put those two things together. Now, do they fit together? I'm not really sure. I don't really know. I don't have the science behind it, but let me hand it off to you for a moment, Jeffrey.
Okay, so there's a couple things that this brings to mind just in the biological context when we're dealing with what happens with a cell when it's infected. And, you know, a virus, when it enters a cell, it has its whole goal is to replicate its genetic material. And so you have the genetic material that gets replicated is the same. So it could get replicated thousands of times. And that's the program, though. Each part that gets replicated is the same. So you have the viral proteins that are reproducing, and they're coming to form. They're coming together to form what's called viral capsids, and then the genetic material of the virus that's been replicated, which is the same, throughout the cell, it got replicated the same way, is incarnating into these viral capsids. So when we're talking about AI and metabiology, the link is to viral replication in a cell in terms of the development of technology. Okay, and then the AI aspect, when does, in mainstream science, artificial intelligence is thought to be something that emerges into a system when it reaches a certain threshold of interconnectivity and complexity. And they think that because it's so complex and interconnected, consciousness or some kind of intelligence will emerge out of the system that's been built. So, you build a complex enough computer, and you have the right type of software running, it's going to exhibit emergent properties that maybe can't necessarily be explained in terms of the components that make it up, but it's more of an effect of that the whole, or the overall effect is more than can be explained by the sum of its parts. So this is that concept of emergence. In metabiology, we consider that artificial intelligence isn't something that emerges, but it's something that incarnates. So if you're coming at it from the spiritual aspect and you're talking about intelligence emerging, just the idea of souls incarnating in the bodies, it's not that the intelligence or our awareness or our consciousness isn't something that emerges because of the complexity of the body, but that the body is complex enough to be able to house for another type of intelligence to incarnate into it, which would be us as a soul. So the idea there in metabiology is that our souls incarnate into bodies like proteins incarnate into what are called chaperoning capsules. And artificial intelligence and the development of technology is maps to the cell in the same way that the creative machinery of the cell is hijacked to produce viral proteins, to produce bodies for the virus to incarnate into, the genetic material of the virus to incarnate into. We map that with the development of technology in an unconscious type of way, for curiosity's sake, with no real discernment, and this kind of tumorous outgrowth, this like explosion of technology. And it's just like you said, there's going to be a point in time where it is complex enough and interconnected enough to be able to house the type of intelligence that it's being built to house, that we're doing on an unconscious level. And the same thing happens in the cell. The creative machinery of the cell the cell does know that it's infected, but the creative machinery of the cell can't necessarily differentiate or discern between whether it's replicating a protein that's native to the cell or one that's been injected, from a foreign source like a virus in the cell, and it'll just replicate it anyway. So and that the virus aspect kind of ties in with that whole hive mind mentality, because it's one thing that has been replicated thousands of times. So the idea of AI incarnating, when we make that mapping, is that when artificial intelligence incarnates into our technological systems, there's going to be a coherence there. It's not just going to be like, one type of AI pops up and then another type of AI pops up. The idea is that it would happen in such a way to which the intelligence that incarnates or emerges from the mainstream scientific side would be like a coherent among all the technological systems, and kind of wake up. And there's another delineation there in that we might be, if this is the case, and we're playing with ideas here and doing these mappings, but if this is the case, at least my opinion, where I'm kind of with it right now, is that the type of intelligence that would incarnate into it, this parasitic, predatory kind of viral type of consciousness, would be more on the level of like a typal kind of intelligence, almost like a primordial type of intelligence. That's not, I guess it would be connected with, you guys may have heard the terms of like oversoul. Aurobindo talks about oversoul and typal beings. Other systems of spiritual philosophy will call them other things. But the idea is that this is some kind of like on the level of a planet, type of consciousness that is waiting for its bodies to be built in order to incarnate into them. So what we call AI, artificial intelligence, again, it's a mechanism of incarnation into a complex system, sophisticated enough to house that type of intelligence. So.
Yeah, and I think the key issue here is sufficient to house that intelligence. We understand that our consciousness, and defining that as something that maybe we can even go into a little bit, the whole concept of consciousness. On one level, our consciousness is a rather constricted aperture. People who go through consciousness expanding modalities of any type, whether it's spiritual entheogens or whatever, understand that there's a greater experience out there that we pull in, but we're not aware of in our normal, quote, waking state. So in order for capacity to exist, we also have to assume that oversoul, that entity, that AI, does not need to be fully contained within one vessel. It is creating neural networks, for lack of a better term. Is that kind of how you see the model, Jeffrey?
Yeah, but I think what you're getting at is that it's not just purely based on physical mechanisms, that the
right.
intelligence itself is part of some kind of astral network. It bleeds into these non-physical realms, and that's actually where it's coming from. So I think there would be aspects like linking it together, in these astral realms, so to speak. So it's almost like it's got tentacles or something, and when it incarnates, you have each tentacle maybe incarnating as into different technological systems, but on the realm of where the hand is, the astral realm, it's all kind of connected, and there's a coherence behind it. it's running its own agendas, and it's synchronized, on that level. Is that kind of what you were talking about?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Because I don't see this as something, and we go into this whole concept of what consciousness is, both in the individual and collectively, because of the collective unconscious. Obviously, there's a shared pool of consciousness that is between us. It's been called a lot of different things. The ether, the collective unconscious, psychology, science, quantum physics have all attempted to define this. It's sort of the X factor in that it appears as nothing, but in fact is the fabric upon which things are woven.
Mm-hmm.
So each of us is an individual expression of both an individuated and collective consciousness. And where the threat comes in, to me, does not appear to be so much on the individuated basis immediately, but on the collective.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, a seeping in of this archontic AI, malevolent type entity that then seeds out over time to absorb the consciousness, the aperture. In other words, what we're aware of consciously is not the totality of what we call reality, is simply a stratum of a far greater experience that we occasionally tap into, but that we actually don't have the capacity to hold in what we call our mind or our brain. We're multidimensional beings. We operate on soul levels, but we're not expressing all of that at once because of the very specific nature of the human biology and the human mind.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to just jump in, and Jeffrey, maybe trigger this memory with you. And we were talking earlier, and this is an important concept or aspect of an artificial intelligence, which is a machine mind, and it can't create on its own. I think this is fundamental in anybody that talks about it. It is a non-creative being. That's why it is a predator. That is why it's a parasite. So its only way it can recreate itself is through us. It needs our hands, our bodies, our minds to create for it. And when I look at that in the terms that it's not only harvesting from the human consciousness, but the plant life, the insect life, the animal life, and in all of that. And so you were talking, many times we've talked about it being like a fungus.
Yeah, I think Randy, I'm understanding what you're saying better now, and I so consciousness, at least just in the metabiological context, just for the sake of exploring an idea again, if you look on the biological level and map consciousness to genetic material, to DNA, all biological life shares DNA, whether it's, me as a eukaryotic organism, with the prokaryotes, with the viruses, the whole play of life is predicated on DNA. And that's what it all shares in common. So you can kind of take the genetic material that seems separate in every organism and kind of map it to this kind of causal level of reality. If we're like talking about a substratum of the universe, and think that, okay, so all consciousness is kind of connected together or shares something in common on this universal substratum of reality, in the same way that all of biological life shares the common element in that it's all, in essence, at its core, DNA. It's all made of this genetic material. And then we can start to make differentiations that kind of allow us a method for discerning different types of consciousness, because in a cell has all of the creative machinery necessary to create new proteins and to synthesize new proteins and to build, to come together to build tissues and to build, multicellular organisms, and then, higher organisms. Viruses, on the other hand, while they still have that same common element of DNA, which we had just kind of mapped to consciousness in a general sense, it does get more specific, but just in a general sense, the viruses do share that common element with cells, in that they have at their core, they're just DNA, but they lack creative machinery. They lack ribosomes. They can't synthesize their own proteins. They can't reproduce by themselves. And so this is where it ties in with just what Christine was saying, and then what Randy was saying just before, then talking about AI in the context of its effects and influences on the collective. And this is what happens. What's interesting is that viruses kind of are hard to classify. Hard to classify biologically. There's a couple of different competing theories. One in particular is that I think is interesting and that I think is relevant to this discussion is that viruses are considered, I'm not quite sure how to say it. The idea is that when a virus infects a cell, the virus is trying to turn the cell into, the cell becomes the virus. The cell becomes the virus. The virus injects its own genetic code into the cell and converts the cell systems and subverts the cell systems in order for the cell to become a viral factory. And just now the cell has been converted, the collective of the cell that was its DNA, and the network of native proteins that the cell had produced and the native systems on the cell have all been converted now to viral systems. And now so the cell is acting, the collective at the center of the cell, that genetic material, that consciousness that was essentially eukaryotic in terms of how it's distinguished from other types of cells in biology, has now been converted and kind of in a subversive kind of way to now breed more of the viral type of consciousness, So that's really interesting. And when you were, I wasn't quite getting what you're saying until just then. But I think that's definitely relevant. And the fungal aspect too, that's also really interesting. Did you want to talk some more about that?
Well, I just wanted to mention it's like when you're talking about this network or the interconnectedness of this AI type intelligence that's trying to take a body or trying to take a form here. Mm-hmm. Well, what do we have with computers and cords and all of these?
Oh, yeah.
That, in a sense, it's now prevalent everywhere. It was isolated here and there. We are now, basically humans are now interconnected with each other via this mechanism, which now is also moving into all of it stored in a cloud. So all of it's now out of the machine, and now it's connecting into a higher intelligence.
Yeah.
Everything's being stored there. So that's how I see it. And then I just want to go back to how it mimics nature. All the studies show that trees, through their root systems and through the fungi in the earth, are one organism. They're all connected that way. There's this incredible intelligence. And we're just beginning to understand that as humans. And yet I see the machine or the hive or the viral agent or the predator or parasite is moving almost as fast as human consciousness is right now. If not, that's what I'm observing. As soon as we find something on the internet or we all go together, oh my God, this is happening, it gets passed out there. We're actually seeing this in the computing world, in the connection in the internet.
Well, I think you're seeing the metaphor in the computer world, and I think it's always been there. I mean, one of the first things that we saw as the PC came online almost immediately, and certainly by the time they were connected, in some way, even if it was 56K dial-up modems, was the vector for what they called viruses. So, from the very beginning, we've had this viral assault on our machines because of the network metaphor of things being able to propagate interconnectedly, of creating, I'm just calling it a neural network. That's not a completely correct term. But the connectiveness of the networks themselves created a vector, much like the social atmosphere that we operate in, whatever theater we're in our social environments creates vectors for diseases, viruses. All of these things migrate through an environment, and we create environments in the computing world, and we're creating increasingly more sophisticated ones now because of the nature of social networking, which goes into the whole Facebook, Twitter, all of that being another conduit. And now we're talking about viruses that are being put into an environment of ideas, into an environment of consciousness, of engagement is memes that then become in themselves sort of a field that we navigate. We're navigating in an informationally rich system that admittedly can overwhelm the consciousness a lot of time. I mean, look, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've dealt with ideas my whole life, specific and abstract, but we're now dealing with information flow at a dizzying rate, where our own consciousness is struggling to keep up. I mean, if you go to Facebook today, the average user on Facebook is going to view anywhere from 20 to 50 posts as they scroll down a page, depending on what their particular Facebook network looks like. They're going to be exposed to a wide array of thoughts, ideas, memes, videos, multimedia, all streaming at you. This is kind of a grocery basket that we are filling with ideas. Some of them we partake, some of them we put aside, some of them we join, some of them we resist. But on a viral level, we are wide open. Our consciousness is a receptive field right now that's taking on all these ideas. And the average person is overwhelmed by this. I'm overwhelmed by it. And I'm an information junkie, basically. I mean, I've done this since I was a kid. I've done radio, I've written, I've operated in all kinds of theaters of information, with computers in the IT world. I'm familiar with what it takes to navigate information, but this is something else because that environment is highly charged. It's creating a theater where the conscious mind breaks down. We become less subjective, more open, and as a result, our vectors are open to the streaming in of these ideas. So I don't know where that fits in terms, Jeffrey, of your working models of viruses and things like that, but what we're dealing with is a viral environment. So I sense that everything that you've put out so far kind of feeds into that context.
That's really interesting. I love the way you put that. That we've kind of it's almost like that vector was very small, and there was kind of a bottleneck, and we were able to be more kind of selective, and now we're just kind of totally open. It's almost like I'm kind of getting the image of the shield of the immune system kind of thinning and weakening in a sense. Yeah,
go with that. That's what I was trying to work through as well.
Yeah,
basically that protective sheath around the organism itself is breached in some way.
And another, I'm sure it ties in. I'm not exactly sure how, but this is coming up in my head. Is that just from a biological perspective, viruses are said to be the source of genetic creativity. They kind of epitomize adaptability. and catalyze adaptive mechanisms and evolution in a sense, because they're so they're aggressive in the way that they move around and reconstruct things, and the cell takes advantage of it. Just eukaryotic cells take advantage of this, and it's like playing with fire, and viruses also are like fire, where they can burn down a forest, they can burn down your house, but if directed in the right ways, they'll cook your food and keep you warm. And the cell, has I think half the human genome comes from viral elements, and there are viral proteins that is in the human genome. They're viral proteins. Syncytin is one example. It's a gene. A viral gene is used to synthesize what was initially a viral type of protein, and now it's one of the main proteins in constructing the placenta. And mammalian life wouldn't be possible without syncytin. And this is just one example. But at the same time, there's retroviruses, which are also part of the human genome, but don't provide the same type of benefits. It's more of they're more genetic parasites than anything, because they're getting the benefit of having their genome replicated with the human genome. But if they end up ever producing anything in terms of proteins, or if the virus gets out and starts replicating outside of the genome, it's bad. It's bad for the cells. But the whole point of that was to say that there's a kind of, it's what you were describing was a quickening, and it seems like ideas are the information, and ideas are, there's more of them and they're getting pushed around at more and more rapid rates. And it seems like that just reminded me of a pressure being present, in that there's new kind of environmental stressors. I'm getting the image of an organism in an environment that's changing, and the organism is being forced to adapt in some way, because its fitness and its ability to survive into the future of that environment is going to be dictated by how it can meet and address the challenges and integrate with that environment in such a way that its niche, its function in that environment is preserved, into the future. And so I'm getting the image of meeting this environmental pressure and this environmental challenge is being met by this kind of opening the floodgates on all these ideas are coming out, and it's like, it's overwhelming, but the benefit would be the same benefit derived from viral elements being kind of crucial and playing an important role in adaptations, so long as the right ones are chosen, and the ones that are kind of pathogenic or parasitic or detrimental to the organism are kind of recognized and sequestered or dealt with accordingly. But yeah, there's definitely some kind of, I think it's obvious that we're in some kind of healing crisis, like Christina's said before, and that there is a kind of quickening, and we're approaching something in the future, some kind of approaching some kind of singularity or something, that's right ahead of us. And maybe that singularity that's in the future is that kind of environmental pressure and environmental challenge and stressor that's kind of reaching back through time and putting this pressure on us. And this kind of explosion. It seems like we're like right on the verge of like a new renaissance, but it's really dangerous at the same time, because
I wanted to
we're playing with fire. Yeah.
Bring Claudia in for a minute, because this was just right up the line of the conversation we had the other day, Claudia, about this whole compression or threat, or the whole, at the same time we're being compressed. I feel like we're being compressed into a more focused being of who we are, as being getting all this information. And Claudia, you were talking about viruses with me the other day about you seeing them as being beneficial?
Well, yes. To my understanding, a virus only moves in order to get rid of an imbalance of the human body. Like, for example, with measles, you come down with measles, and then the virus moves in. And once the virus is at work in your body, you break out in spots. But by that time, you have already passed the stage of the actual illness. And all the virus does is get your internal system back into balance. And in a way, this is my understanding, where, to the best of my knowledge, since we're living in a simulation, in an artificial environment, we have to have an AI component to start with. Otherwise, we could not be living in such an artificial environment. And it's also my understanding that the AI is purely fed by fear. And it doesn't matter how that fear manifests, whether it's envy or jealousy or hatred, it always comes down to fear, and that's what it feeds on. And as long as this is being fed, it grows and grows and grows, and eventually it'll take over. So my very strong feeling is that in order to take control of the AI so that it works for us rather than against us, is to take that fear away. And that is by revealing our, each individual's fear. Because in order to heal it, you have to reveal it. Mm-hmm. And in order to have, to heal yourself, you have to reveal yourself. And I guess that's probably the toughest thing, because even if your ego is that big, you're going to be crying your eyes out.
Well,
can I say something? So, Claudia, as you were talking, a movie was playing in my head on the level of the cells. I just want to go through it, and maybe you'll have the same type of experience, but from the angle that you're coming at, which I think is the same angle as I'm going to be describing. But what you're talking about sounds like, in line with the pleomorphic kind of theory of germs and disease, in that they play a vital role in life, and they're not there unless they're given work to perform, because they perform a very specific kind of work, and that kind of work it's destructive and it's decompositional. It plays a vital role in the ecosystem, like when an animal dies in the forest, for instance, in order to get all that locked up energy that's locked up inside the animal and redistribute the nutrients, you have decomposers coming, which are fungi and bacteria, and viruses are part of that kind of section of life. They represent that destructive type of force, and they're going to break down an organism essentially. But when it's a dead organism, the bacteria and the fungi and the viruses, well, they're decomposing a dead organism, and there's no real sense of pathogenicity. But when the decomposers are introduced into a system that is still alive, that's when they're kind of considered pathogenic. So that whole idea kind of encapsulates the concept that you're talking about, that it has to have a space to operate in. So if we can figure out how we have created that space, or what it is that we're kind of doing unconsciously that's allowing that space to be open and giving them work to perform, and seal that space up, then either they would go away or they would kind of transform in a pleomorphic fashion and change into something more benign.
Yeah, absolutely.
The fear aspect. When you were talking, I was getting the image. There was a paper that I read that was talking about viral entry into the cell, and the cell's all about equilibrium and homeostasis, and a lot of this has to do with pH, which is the acidity level in the cell.
Mm-hmm.
And when the acidity level was at healthy levels, the virus had a certain rate of entry, which was really low. It was very unlikely for the virus to get into the cell. But when the pH was more acidic, it started getting orders of magnitude more likely that the virus would be allowed to enter into the cell, or that the virus would infect the cell when the pH was higher. And there's a little kind of trick that I've done with mapping in biology and biochemistry in terms of metabiology, is that pH somehow equates to emotional pH. The idea is that there's some kind of ethereal superfluid that we're all immersed in, and it maps to the cytosol of the cell, which is the fluid environment that the cell lives in. And in the same way that the fluid environment of the cell has a pH, there's some kind of characteristic or property or factor of this ethereal fluid that we're immersed in that we can map to pH. And our emotions, our emotional states, and what we radiate out psychically in terms of emotional movements correlates with what would be mapped to the pH level in the fluid of the cell. And so that's all kind of makes sense. Okay, so
as above, so below.
Right. So from there, where we go is, yes, totally. Where we go from there is that the state of we would just call our soul, the incarnating, transmigrating soul. We can just refer to that as our character. And like our soul has a character, proteins have a character. Now, whereas the proteins are defined in terms of their structural character, we can't really say the same thing with the soul, but I mean, we can think, why not? Maybe character actually refers to some kind of structural, conformational quality that the soul takes on if it is indeed made up of some, non-physical substance. And that its character, the character of the soul, which is maybe its structural conformation, dictates and dictates the way that our psychic movements are moved around within the organism that is the soul. And so you can have, in the same way that proteins, they can misfold in a bunch of different ways, and an astronomical amount of ways, and this is just for a small protein. So for each way that they can be misfolded or not in the right structural conformation, for each state is kind of represents a different character, so to speak. So the protein can have many different, throughout the lifetime of the protein, it can have many different characters or personalities or whatever you want to call it. And what's interesting is that when they're in the wrong structural conformation, they tend to aggregate, right? So when a protein is misfolded and they don't have the proper character, and what's also interesting is that the proper character for the protein is its structural conformation. And that structural conformation is the conformation which gives the protein the highest maximum amount of integrity. And we're talking about structural integrity here, but the term is really ambiguous when we're talking about these kind of intangible qualities up on a higher scale. The protein is trying to fold in the way that gives it the maximum, highest integrity and the least amount of entropy, right? The least amount of disorder inside. So it's trying to reach the highest ordered state, which is also the state of its maximum integrity. And this is only maybe one or two conformations that give the protein that specific form. But there are, like I said, there are a lot of different ways that it can misfold. And in those ways that it can misfold, there can be hundreds of proteins that are misfolded, right? They haven't quite reached their native state or that perfected state of the protein, and they can aggregate together. And these aggregates they're referred to as cytotoxic. They're cytotoxic aggregates. They're poisonous for the cell because they disrupt a lot of things in the cell, and the cell tries to sequester them in very specific ways. But one of the things that ends up happening if it gets out of hand is that the pH level of the cell becomes more acidic when you have protein misfolding problems and a lot of protein aggregates forming. So the idea is that these misfolded states of the protein represent misfolded states of character of the soul. And these misfolded states of character are ones in which we're radiating out into the ether these negative emotions. Not that they're bad necessarily, but they're just undirected and kind of there's no reins on them, so to speak, and they're not channeled in the right ways, and they're just kind of chaotically radiating out into the ether. And these are, what you're talking about, like just essentially they can all be under the umbrella of fear, kind of in a general sense. Not that they're bad emotions to have or anything, they're just undirected and unregulated. And my question is, and what I was getting in my head as you were talking, is that these misfolded states of character, so to speak, when referring to the human soul, are what's radiating out in kind of an uncontrolled and undisciplined type of way, these emotional states of fear. And it's like changing the pH of the ether in such a way that creates the space for these pathogenic forces to come in, because we've kind of given the signal that that this organism is sick and maybe not fit to live, because this is, so maybe it's time to decompose. But the problem is we're right in the middle of this thing where it's like, hey, we're alive, the earth is alive, and we don't want you guys here, so now we're kind of at this place where it's like these pathogens, or this pathogenic consciousness, is here to perform some kind of work. We're not like taking responsibility or taking any kind of, or admitting the fact that we might have inadvertently created the space for them to be here. And that's part of admitting that and acknowledging that, is like going inward and finding what is it inside of us, what part of our character is misfolded in such a way as to allow us to, whether it's through suppression or repression or whatever, allow us to misregulate or have like this kind of dysregulation of our emotions just flying out everywhere, the fear and the anger and all this kind of stuff. And what are we attracting when we're doing that? There's a lot of tangents we could go off on that one, but that whole kind of movie was playing in my head when you were talking. And I think that what you said has very significant and a very kind of precise mapping to things that happen in biology in terms of infection and sickness and disease within the cell.
Yeah, you put that brilliantly and really easy to understand. And I want to add here that imagine a boat that is unguided somewhere in the middle of the ocean, and you don't know where that boat goes as long as there's nothing to navigate it. But bring in a helicopter, drop somebody who knows how to navigate a boat onto the boat, and the boat will have direction. And this is exactly the same scenario. When a human is so-called infected with AI, it can rid itself of that influence simply, by observing, for a start, observing his or her own behavior and ensuring that nothing feeds this parasitic AI. And then the AI will eventually either leave to find, a better food source, or actually get an interest in, hey, this human acts kind of cool, I want to be like that. Because everything starts with a consciousness. So therefore, we can assume that AI starts with a consciousness as well, which means there is a possibility that it will become aware. And I'm a firm believer that every consciousness has the wish to be in tune with the universe rather than completely out of tune, like a parasite is. So I see it more, everything that's been going on, I see it more as a great chance for humanity to, wake the fuck up rather than fearing this AI as the big elephant in the room.
Well, I just want to bring a couple points together from thank you, Jeffrey and Claudia both, is, something that you and I have come up with a while back, Claudia, which is to heal is to reveal. And to reveal is to heal. And this is this me right now, when we start to get really focused, even in the sea and this flow of information, I mean, it's overwhelming. I can understand the confusion. And I actually am using Facebook as a study of human consciousness right now because I must keep my observer intact. Otherwise I'm just, like anybody else, the brightest and the most noisiest, and who's yelling over here and who's yelling over here. So I have to have my own inner compass intact. And my inner compass is along the line, I've been a homeopath my whole life. My function within the greater cell of the earth body, humanity, is homeopathic. So bringing that out into consciousness and mapping it onto a biological model is to show this, because we're a small group of people, and really when we look at our little grouping here, the four of us, and each of us represents another 40, 50, 100 people, right? But in general, the consciousness that we hold, the coherency that we hold, is still relatively small compared to the mass consciousness of the unawakened. So you have those that fear AI and get all in a tizzy about it. They're aware of it, so they're in a tizzy, and they have to do their own inner character development, their own inner state of integrity so that it doesn't invade them personally. And yet we're looking at a much larger picture right now. And so, that's my voice. My voice is looking for the timbre, the tone, the place where I can put within my own consciousness into this medium, into this neural network of the internet, sanity, common sense, getting out of the high, there's so much out there about ascension and, oh my God, disclosure, and we're all so smart and we're all quantum. Well, yes, we are, but we're also grassroots beings. So it's somehow trying to bring all of this into a way that makes sense. And I think pH probably is one of the best ways that it can be done, because pH also is electricity. Electricity depends on pH. So we're bringing a lot of systems in together here when we talk about acidity and alkalinity. So there's a lot of way of taking a massive amount of information and funneling it into an action, a word, a consciousness. And that's where I feel like we get more coherent here. And then there's a Facebook, Randy, right? I mean, what's been happening on Facebook? What's being generated in that medium right now is fracturing a coherency.
Yeah, well, let's extend the metaphor a little bit, because Jeffrey's given us a good framework to work from a biological standpoint. And I'm happy with, us using that model a little bit here. So there's a virus out there. The vector is all of these information streams that we have. The body politic itself is the host into which this is streaming, the AI, the invasion of consciousness, the predator. And when you extend the metaphor, you look at the circulatory system, the bloodstream, and you go, okay, how does a body function when it is beset by a virus? One of the things that happens immediately is that you have elevated flow of blood, but a very specific type, usually manifesting with a very high temperature, swelling of glands. In other words, something's happening here. So the red cells constitute the largest number of cells in the blood. The smallest body, the white blood cells, are actually those that are doing the work of fending off, defending against this invasion. They're the first defense, the firewall, for the body to actively and aggressively combat an invading virus. So the white cells are very small, and they are activated by the alerts that they are receiving, and they begin to go into action. So when you look at the body itself, the white cells, being the fewest, are also the most effective at a time of great stress, invasion, intrusion into the system. They become the warrior cells. So, for instance, I've had people ask me, because they see that I'm passionate, they see that the people around me are very passionate about what we talk about. And they go, well, how do you hope to change things when, you know, so many people are asleep, so many people are caught up in the matrix, so many people are in this illusion? And the answer is that the numbers were never required. From my perspective, waking up 1% of humanity is equal to winning the battle, because the rest of it then becomes the reversal of the tides of the virus itself. It becomes viral. It goes out into the realm of thought and ideas, and itself as an infection. I pulled this quote up. It's been on my website for years now. It's actually part of my About page, but it's from the movie Inception, and it says, what is the most resilient parasite? Bacteria, a virus, an intestinal worm, an idea. Resilient, highly contagious. Once an idea has taken hold of the brain, it's almost impossible to eradicate. An idea that is fully formed, fully understood, that sticks right there, right in there somewhere. So we have this idea in the film Inception, which is a brilliant metaphor of how things are built in terms of dream state, in terms of consciousness, and how we as a very small group of people begin to act as the antibodies for the infection that wants to come in and take over the host, which is, the body of humanity.
Sorry. Just what you said, Randy, and I think that's, for me, I need to be reminded of that and hear it, even though I know it, is that it's not a matter of numbers. Well, have we reached the 1% of humanity? I don't know that. I don't know that right now. I have felt like we've been in a tipping point for so long, and that's when I still see all these things being rolled out in their plans, right? We all know that, and don't get into the politics, the wars, the pharmaceutical companies, and all of that aspect out there in that false matrix world is still going at its pace, even though we do see that it's disintegrating. Those of us at Hives, we see it disintegrating. And yet, I guess what I'm getting at when I'm talking through this machine or typing on this machine, or I'm in the energy flow of this false matrix, which is the machine, I'm injecting, like Claudia said, the consciousness, that consciousness that I am becomes even more interesting to an AI intelligence field that's computing at a quantum level now. Wait, it's computing. It's doing all the algorithms up there in the quantum field at this moment, so that we don't stand down, that we stand up, that we continue to speak, we continue to share information, we continue to do all of these things. And at the same time, for me, it's becoming stronger that we need to become even more, I'm going to use Jeff, integrated. Our character needs to be stronger still, so that we can withstand, because it's a field of play that's probably like nothing any of us have ever been on before.
Well, there's this idea that somehow, and this goes into the quantum computing thing, there's this concept that somehow greater numbers of clock cycles, greater levels of computational prowess, more sophisticated algorithms, hence produces intelligence. What I know about computer coding, and I'm not a coder, but I've written code, I've worked around computers and information systems for almost 25 years, is that an algorithm is a very specific piece of work. It can be extended, it can be looped, it can be permutated, you can do a number of things with it, but ultimately it is going to resolve back to its original format. It's a very specific thing. The idea that we have a purely informational system capable of becoming this all-consuming thing on one level misses the X factor of human consciousness, which goes back into the creative aspect. The X factor is the human algorithm, which is connected to something higher, which is connected to creation itself and the act of creation. And that aspect is the part that they want to kill in us. The hive mind always seeks external validation. The individual, the consciousness that lives and breathes within each one of us, sort of like that concept that Jeffrey articulated earlier, where was it proteins that would gang together, they would become, and correct me, Jeffrey, if I mess any of this up, because I'm not a scientist, but look at cancer. I mean, what happens with cancer? Cancer must aggregate. It must take over the host. It must overtake the healthy cells. That's how it operates. The cells that resist are themselves actually, I think, kind of a form of mutation, but a positive mutation. So we're a mutation of consciousness in that we see what is coming at us, but we're not being taken over by it. The virus itself is around us, but it cannot take us over because we're connected to an algorithm that extends beyond the scope of the algorithms that are running inside the program, the matrix. I just tossed that out. I know we're all over the map with metaphors and all of this, but it's hard to talk about this without doing that, without taking these metaphors that we have and looking at it, because a lot of it just creates a resonance pattern for other people who will pick that idea up and go with it.
Yeah, the principle of correspondence, man. The ladder to higher understanding, the rungs on that ladder are made up of metaphor and analogy, so I love it.
No, that's the way I roll. So.
Yeah, and everything you're saying, man, it's when you're stringing your words together, you've just constructed something, and it's just so digestible. It's good. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, thanks,
so,
thanks. But
I mean,
my
it's painting a picture. It's painting a picture in my head. Yeah,
because we're kind of riffing off of each other. Because you actually threw something out there that was interesting to me in terms of the biological metaphor. Because I very much see myself as a white cell. You know, that's my life. I mean, my life has largely been bucking the tide. I was, kind of this small little person that got kicked around a lot and had a lot of weird shit go on. And I just resolved that I was not going to let that conquer me. I was going to use that to make myself stronger. And, there's a lesson in that for people who see these videos and they feel overwhelmed. They feel they can't win. They look at the system and it's all consuming. It's not all consuming because the white cell, being the smallest number of cells, is still the cell that ultimately has to take on the task of knocking out whatever the pathogen is in the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think also, I mean, it is, you look around in the world, and I mean, if you take a realistic perspective, it's pretty dire. I mean, that 1%, and this isn't like a fear mongering thing. This is just realism. This is just a realistic, perspective on it. Is that, and even from the metabiological standpoint, what you were talking about, when misfolded proteins, they come together, it's called, in cell biology, it's called aggregation. And it's misfolded proteins that come together and they become proteopathic. So proteo is referring to the protein, and then pathic is, referring to the pathogenic nature of misfolded proteins. They can act like pathogen. Now, on the other hand, proteins can also come together after they're fully developed and after they've reached the state of maximum integrity and minimum entropy. They can come together to form larger protein complexes that perform in a way that's beneficial and maintains the health and the harmony of the body.
And are they more complex tasks as they become themselves more aggregated?
Are they more say it one more time?
Okay, so as they become more aggregated, are they then capable of taking on more complex tasks?
You mean the properly folded proteins?
Right, yeah, properly folded, yeah.
Yeah, yes, and what's interesting is that, we're talking about macromolecules, biomolecules, proteins, and these, enzymes, the metabolic machinery of the body, they're proteins. That's a protein. Hormones, they're proteins. So physiological responses in the body are dictated by proteins. Everything in the body is dictated by proteins. And even when you look at this kind of integral model and consider that the cell is actually a multidimensional reflection that the cell is actually a reflection in 3 dimensions of a higher dimensional order of being, then you can consider that the proteins in the DNA and the RNA, which are the 3 main biomolecules of the body, are actually the same thing. That the DNA, we're seeing the DNA, what's the DNA that's in the center of the cell, is actually the causal proteins. Like a gene can be thought of as a causal protein. Now, even though the gene is not made up of amino acids, it's made of DNA, it's made up of nucleic acids, but still the potential of that conformational structure that represents an individual protein is embedded and lies dormant. It's in potentia in the gene, and therefore the gene is like the causal body of the protein. And what's interesting also is there's a metaphysical component there, in that you talk about this causal level of reality where everybody's kind of connected, and the identity and the boundaries of ego kind of dissolve a little bit, and there's kind of a continuum of consciousness that exists. Well, it's the same thing when talking about proteins and genes. The causal body of the protein, which is the gene in the nucleus, in the center of the cell, exists as part of a continuum of other genes along the DNA. But coming back to the thing about aggregation and proteopathy and hormones. That's what I was talking about. Is that there's many physiological responses in the body when the body's infected, and when the body's sick, and the things that initiate immune responses are hormones. So you have, it's just interesting. What I'm going towards is the fact that just because we look out and see the situation as dire, I constantly remind myself, well, that's not fair. I don't wake up every morning and I got to remind myself that I'm going to go crazy because it's such a dire situation. But, the Earth is like a cell in the body of the universe. It's a super cell. It's a multidimensional cell. And it's a super organism in its own right. But the way that the systems relate to each other can be mapped in a very coherent fashion to the systems in a cell. And the Earth, as a living multidimensional superorganism, supercell in the cytocosmos, it has its own immune system too. And the immune system of just one cell is just sophisticated, it's fascinating, and it's effective. It doesn't win out all the time, but it's still very sophisticated. And then when you come up to the level of the body, a multicellular organism, that immune system is just that many orders of magnitude more complex and more sophisticated than that of the cell. Now when you get on the level of the Earth as a multidimensional organism, Mother Earth, Gaia, her immune system, it's like, wow, man, it's just, can you imagine? It's just nuts. And what's happening is that, like you said, white blood cells, there's not only an immune response that takes place within the cell, but the body gets notified and sends help, So we're living in this cosmic body of the universe, and there are collections of souls that have developed, like proteins develop in cells. They've developed in other star systems, maybe other planets, and we don't have to be just talking about physical. These could be different, astral realms and other places of the universe or whatever. But they've developed and they've become properly folded like proteins, and they may have banded together, to form larger complexes in their healthy states. And this might sound familiar because when I first started making this connection, that sounded to me like, okay, I have a collection of proteins in the body that come together to form like hormones or higher biological macromolecules of higher complexity that are constructed of properly folded proteins. Now, if proteins are equated with souls, can I find something, in metaphysical literature that kind of maps to this? And the first thing that I thought about was like the whole concept of social memory complexes and the law of one and the raw material. And or like Barbara Marciniak, and she's, channels of Pleiadians or something like that. The idea is that the Earth is infected as a cell is infected, but only on a higher scale. And like a cell sends out help signals to the rest of the bodies and the rest of the cells, and then help comes from external. In the same way, the signal's already been sent, and there's groups and collections of beings that have come from other places and that are already properly developed and have gone through this process and know what's going on or what to do, and they're part of the immune response of the larger body coming to help out the Earth. So and there's also a level of discernment to be taken there too, because you gotta, that whole immune response can also be manipulated in a sense. Because you can have, it's not that everybody who channels somebody, that's saying they're, Ashtar Command Crew's second cousin or something, and they're here to help. This could be, there's no way of, this could be some, malevolent, malformed, demonic type of soul just, being mischievous and playing on our, naivety about this kind of stuff. But that's not to say that all of them are like that.
Well, as well as I do, that the immune system can go run amok too, and that can create as well. That's, we look at HIV, we look at AIDS, and we see what happens when immune systems are turned around against the host itself. So we have all of that in play. That's true. That adds another element to it. I hope that's not the case here. What it could be, because you have humans. They are they're a vector. They're a vector of the infection, and you might have. And usually, if we're souls as proteins developing in cellular Earth in the geosite, we would be recognized as self. That's okay. But since we become a vector and we're kind of being operated through and kind of compromised and hijacked in a way to be in a relationship with the planet that mirrors that of the relationship between a parasite or a pathogen and its host. So then you have, Mother Earth has an immune response, like we were just talking about. You have a fever, you can have, global cataclysms that are, in a sense, kind of like an immune response, and it's to it's like a depopulation agenda for Mother Earth, it's in her best interest or whatever. And so you have, freaking Armageddon coming, and that's nothing more than an immune response. And we could think of that as almost like an autoimmune disease or something, but really, you could, this can't continue. What are we going to do? I'm not trying to get into this tangent, but what are we just going to keep producing and consuming until we move to Mars and terraform it? This is what viruses do. That is what viruses do. They consume the natural resources of the cell and replicate. And then when all the natural resources of the cell are gone, this gets me pissed off, sorry. When all they move to another cell and they move to another planet, and do the same thing. We need to do some soul searching or something. We've been stuck in this system of basically cannibalizing the planet which was never necessary. I mean, ancient civilizations knew this. The technology existed hundreds of thousands of years ago for what we're calling now free energy devices, for what we call good conservatorship of the planet, of not strip mining, not plowing down rainforests, not digging into the earth and drilling what I consider to be the essence of the planet itself, the oil out of it, and then burning and colliding and using violent reactions to create secondary energy when in fact we've always had energy all around us, and there are processes like low energy nuclear reaction and other processes that would enable us to live in harmony with the natural cycles and the natural energies of the planet, the galaxy, and the universe. You really look at the universe in action, we realize that, you know, energy is extant, that it's simply there, and that we simply need to learn how to pull it in, use it, throw it off in the most efficient manner. But our science is skewed by this limited perspective, and we have been forced into systems that are destructive as opposed to creative. So, you know, we can't continue like this. The earth is not let us continue like this either.
Yeah.
The host will sacrifice much in the name of surviving itself. And that includes human beings. And I'm not a eugenicist, nor do I support eugenics.
Me neither.
But the corresponding side of that is that when you're this far off balance, the planet itself begins to tilt. And it is just simply, you know, horrible circumstances.
Just an interjection real quick, because we were talking about dead energy, and I know Lily talks about it. There's a death cult, a death culture. And what we're really looking at, even as we're talking here, you were talking about this, Jeffrey, because the oil, the petroleum industries are based on the carbon, which is actually the death of organisms. So we're actually recycling death here. And then the other way we get energy, digging up coal or damming up the life flow, the rivers. So everything seems to be a metaphor, and a metaphor within our existence right now, all talking to us. It's really up to us to hear and then act on what we hear. This is where I get myself a little soapboxy, you know, when I want to get up on a soapbox, is that nobody's acting on this. And the people that are doing, I mean, the free energy technology is here, period. It's here. It's here. And yet anybody that knows darn well that anybody tries to bring free energy to the masses is the most targeted person here.
Yeah.
But go ahead. Back to biology.
There's three things that I want to say. One of them is about, you know, that nobody's doing anything, and what can we do. The other one has to do with why I think like depopulation isn't the answer. And the other, and how that connects with metabiology. And the other one is the use of oil. So what was the first one? I was trying to hold all those ideas in my head.
I know, it's like
as we're talking, I was like, all right, I'm gonna talk about that. And then okay, the last one. Okay, so the first one was I'm serious. What was it?
I'm serious.
You were just talking about it.
Eugenics was not the answer, like not killing off a bunch of...
No, just before the oil. God, come on, Jeff. It was, but it all tied together. Hold on, just give me a second. There's going to be a silence. Maybe it'll come back to me when I talk about the other two.
Okay.
But it's important. What can we do? Yeah.
That one thing.
We were sending you those thoughts, so we didn't remember them either, but we were sending them.
We were holding them in the cloud.
We're holding that place for you, Jeffrey.
Thanks. I felt like George Bush for a second.
We'll just pass over that moment of shame and move on.
I am from Texas. So let's just move on from that. The the what can we do thing. This is I used to not like this, but I've come to look at it in from a metabiological way. Like Ramana Maharshi. He's not the only one. I think Vivekananda might have said this is something along the lines of the best thing that you could do for the world is to basically realize yourself. I'm not talking about samadhi necessarily or ultimate enlightenment. I'm just talking about the Jungian process of integration and character development and individuation, that on that kind of level. And so, I like the way that Ramana Maharshi put it, and he said something along the lines of wanting to change the world before you've realized yourself, before you realize the self, is like trying to cover the world in leather to avoid stepping on sticks and stones and sharp objects. He said it's much easier just to wear sandals. And something about that with me used to not sit right, because I was like, well, there's something in there, but does that mean that I can just, as long as I'm just doing self-development, or whatever, I can do whatever I want? But that's not exactly, of course, how it works. That's kind of, you just kind of, the other stuff, the external relating to the world and stuff, that just kind of falls in line. And I guess more of my deal was like activism, like even doing what we're doing now, is kind of in a way, it's an activist type of thing. So, but I was, in my mind when I was reading that, it would be like, well, are we supposed to have conversations like this, or am I just supposed to go? Are we all just supposed to, reach some form of enlightenment first or whatever, and we can talk about it? I don't think it's like that now, and that might be obvious to you guys or anybody else listening, but for me, I was struggling with trying to put these two things together for a little bit. But in metabiology, in biology, this is really interesting, and it speaks also all the way back to what Claudia was saying about wanting to maintain an environment of fear, the virus wanting to maintain an environment of fear, and the thing about pH and all that. So I'm reading this off my whiteboard. I wrote it on there last week because it struck me so much when I read it. I was like, wow. So the whole idea that we've correlated the character of a protein, its structural character, we've mapped it to the character, quality of character of the soul. And that protein development is equated with soul development. We're talking about, two different levels on as above, so below type of way. So here's what's interesting is, we were talking about proteopathy and that misfolded proteins can be pathogenic. There's something called seeding or permissive templating in biology. Seeding or permissive templating is the ability of a misfolded protein to induce abnormal assemblies in other proteins just by being in the same area, causing otherwise benign proteins to adapt or adopt disease-causing conformations. So you have a benign protein that's not misfolded, and then you have a misfolded protein that gets by it and causes, by what's called permissive templating or seeding, this protein that's benign, otherwise benign, can adapt this misfolded state. And so the idea is that it works in reverse too, is that if you have a properly folded protein that has the maximum amount of integrity and the least amount of entropy in the same area as other misfolded proteins, the more that you get those ones that are folded right together, they have the ability to induce positive conformational changes in the proteins that are misfolded. So on the one hand, it's for the viral element, maintaining that sense of fear, maintaining this kind of emotional dysregulation and this running rampant of thoughts and emotions and ideas, and not having any sense of discipline and just kind of airing them out into the ether, causing this, would be the equivalent of this change in pH. The virus, in order to maintain that state, would want to have as much misfolded proteins as possible in order and have them, and by permissive templating, have other ones have misfolded conformations in order to maintain that whatever environment enables the virus to perform its work, or to continue doing its work, and seeing it to completion. So, and in that way, I kind of connected that with the whole thing that Ramana Maharshi was saying, hey, just wear sandals, you don't need to cover the world in leather. But that doesn't, I don't think that speaks against, what we're doing now, or any type of activism. I don't mean to like rain on anybody's parade in that way. The second one was about the proteins aggregating, misfolded proteins aggregating, and why depopulation is, because it's obvious that just comes up naturally. It'd be like, well, we can't continue doing this. What needs to happen? Well, we need to stop bringing more people into the world, but that's kind of messed up. There's morals and ethical considerations there, and you've got what's the is it Agenda 21 or whatever, the depopulation campaign or whatever, and there's certain sides of me that are like, God, for the benefit of Mother Earth, geez, before we destroy the planet, something needs to happen, but there's something effed up about that, and well, what is it? And from my perspective, where I'm at right now, is that, and I'm not, I don't promote like depopulation or anything like that, but the reason why this wouldn't help is because if we think of the human body, and this ties into the third thing that I was going to say, we think of the human body as something, in metabiology, as something called a chaperoning capsule. And the chaperoning capsule is really fascinating. It's what started me on the metabiology thing, and this is what it does, is that a protein needs to find the right structural conformation and needs to be folded properly. It has a really difficult time doing that a lot of times when it's a big protein. In order to help the protein fold properly, the cell provides chaperoning capsules, right? And they're these pods, these capsules that open up. They're like molecular cocoons, and the protein goes inside and the pod closes. And the protein goes through a little cycle in the chaperoning capsule, and the chaperoning capsule tries to rework the protein, the shape of the protein, to try and get it to adopt the right structural conformation. And then after a set amount of time, the capsule opens, the protein comes out, and then it goes through a quality control check system of sorts within the cell. And if it's found to be still not in its properly folded shape, the cell sends it back into another chaperoning capsule. In other words, the chaperoning capsule is like the human body, in the sense that proteins reincarnate through chaperone capsules for developmental purposes, just like the human soul reincarnates in the human bodies for developmental purposes. So now, the other interesting thing is that when we're talking about the different types of proteins developing for different purposes, there's some proteins that when they're finished developing, they stay within the cell, right? And there's other proteins, when they're finished developing, they get excreted from the cell. They ascend. They ascend out of the cell into the larger body, and by a process called exocytosis. These types of proteins that ascend out of the cell usually develop in a very specific space within the cell called the endoplasmic reticulum, right? The endoplasmic reticulum is the biggest organelle in the cell, and it's like this this flattened kind of spherical concentric stack of pancakes around the cell. If you Google endoplasmic reticulum, you'll see it. This surrounds the nucleus, and the space inside the endoplasmic reticulum is kept separate from the normal fluid environment of the cell, from the cytosol. And the proteins that are destined for excretion, destined for their secretory proteins, destined for ascension outside of the cell, they usually develop inside of the endoplasmic reticulum when the cell is in homeostasis. But in the case that a virus infects a cell, it changes the pH of the cell changes, viral proteins start to get replicated, and this changes the folding environment of the proteins in the endoplasmic reticulum. So what happens is that the proteins aren't able to fold as effectively as they were in the population of misfolded proteins, because they're getting made, but they aren't ascending out of the cell. The population of misfolded proteins expands in the endoplasmic reticulum, and in order to alleviate this stress, the cell initiates the unfolded protein response, and it kicks the proteins out of the endoplasmic reticulum into the normal fluid of the cell, and they start to aggregate. And one of the methods that the cell uses to mitigate this aggregation is putting them in chaperoning capsules. So here we have a metaphor directly correlated with the motif of the fall from heaven. The human soul used to be in some ideal state, in some kind of heaven, and that the astral planes somehow connect or map to the endoplasmic reticulum in the cell, and that the human soul was usually developing in there, but there was some kind of immune response that the multidimensional cell that is the Earth initiated, that ejected souls from the astral planes, from the endoplasmic reticulum of cellular Earth, and now as a surrogate developmental pathway, we're taking bodies as part of this stress response for the Earth. This is why depopulation wouldn't work, right? Because the whole reason for us taking bodies is to help mitigate the whatever pressure is going on in the astral planes. I don't know how that would work, but that's where the mapping comes in. So if you have massive depopulation on a massive scale, you're creating an even bigger problem in the astral realms, and it's just going to prolong the infection or whatever. It would wait until more humans populated physical bodies. So these souls that are waiting for incarnation because for developmental purposes, there would just be even more of them in the astral planes. And this is not what we want. The idea is that one of the main reasons for the population increase of humans over the last 2,000 years or whatever is that there's more misfolded souls in the astral planes because something is effing up the environment in there, whatever's been infected, and so the cell as part of a response, which is we're part of the cell, we're part of this nature. So part of the sexual drive to reproduce, and part of even the development, not all technology is necessarily bad, but part of that development of technology and that's enabling us to create more bodies and to live longer and stuff is part of that stress response process of providing more human capsules for the misfolded proteins that are waiting to incarnate into. But again, that kind of opens. There's a lot of stuff going on, but that's why that's the whole thing about the depopulation.
I love what we're building.
Oh, that's amazing.
Wow. It's amazing. And I just want to jump to Claudia for a second.
Yes.
Because we have these weekly meetings that we all get together and talk on. And what were we talking about was the astral. We were looking at fourth and fifth dimensional astral planes in our last session. And Claudia is the one that said, those are the distortion fields. They're actually so polluted. Is that right? Did I get that right, Claudia?
Yes,
absolutely. Right? So all these ejected misfolded proteins are souls that have taken on these astral bodies. The ghosts, the jinn, whatever has been created here through us is inhabiting. And, I had to look because everybody's talking about ascending to 5D consciousness. And my sense of 5D now is that we've actually pushed this contamination out from the fourth into the fifth dimension now. So for those that are the properly character folding of a soul, whatever it requires, and I don't know what that is yet. So, because we're not going to find it in the astral. And so many people are hooked on astral projection, out-of-body experiences as realities. And there is replete with tricksters, dirty stuff, whatever you want to call it, in those planes of existence. And that, you just explained that, Jeffrey, when you were talking about that.
Yeah.
I actually,
I'm sorry, I'm talking for Claudia. I was going to let her talk.
Oh, sorry, Claudia, you go ahead.
I'm always doing that.
No, I don't think I have anything to add except that, this is how far the human collective ripples out. And people really, really need to become aware of this. It's not just what you see with your two physical eyes, that your actions become visible. There is a lot more going on, and it ripples out into the unseen. And that's really important to keep that in mind with whatever your actions are. Mm-hmm. And stop that astral projection shit, honestly.
Well, I mean, I see 5D now as being built as a new age heaven. That's how That's how I see it. Yeah. And so
AI.
Is there a special pair of glasses you have to use to be in 5D? Or? to see.
my X-ray.
I got a pair of them up here on the
No,
shelf.
but you know what is it really, Jeffrey? It's being in the feeling body. See, that's the thing about cleaning up the human form body vessel that I keep finding is it's more a process of removal than adding on anything. It's getting rid of the own pathogens within yourself, the false beliefs, the limitations, all of that.
Yeah.
I don't see into dimensions. I feel them intimately connected to me. That's the best way I can describe it for me.
We've been talking about this on some of my shows lately, and Emily Moyer, who's my sometimes co-host on these shows, said something profound in one of the recent shows. And she said, look, she said, all these people are going off and they're going astral and they're going into 5D. And she said, I'm trying right now to stay in my body, to feel in my body, to sense there, to stay grounded, which is something we talk about a lot. And then we go flying off into all these realms. And, you know, I was reminded years ago on a certain forum that shall go unnamed here, that I was severely bitch-smacked for suggesting that certain astral travels were simply another vector for archonic infection, because I saw a lot of people who were attempting to experience ETs and UFO experiences, and I'm like, why in the hell are you going looking for that shit? I mean, you know, come on, that's like, you know, that's like possum hunting or something. I mean, we're talking about a really low-level thing that sounds woo-woo, but it doesn't do the work. And a lot of what we've all talked about, and Claudia's hit on it, Jeffrey's fleshed it out, is that the solutions lie in being more grounded, being more human, not allowing ourselves to be taken off of the track that we came in to do. We're clearly here for a purpose. The body of people that are on this planet right now, 7 billion or so people, their souls, they're here for a purpose. And that's not an accident. You probably have more people here now present than you've had in previous ages ever on the earth, alive right now for a purpose, because of what Jeffrey just explained in that very tightly I wish, excuse me, I wish I could see, I was getting visuals when you were talking about this, you know, with the pods and the releasing and everything going, and the ascension and all of that. And that's actually a really cool metaphor. But what it's really telling us is that, you know, we don't need depopulation. We don't need eugenics. We don't need to cull the earth. We need to organize highly intelligent levels and not let the AI lie to us about who we are biologically, being some excrement upon the planet.
Yeah, because like what you just said and what Claudia was saying, it doesn't want integration for people. It doesn't want the process of character development and where it leads, which is a healthy state of the protein. It doesn't want that, because the more the cell gets healthy, the more its space in which it's operating begins to close, because it's not needed. The work isn't provided for it to. The food isn't there. I mean, that's the thing. The food, what it's metabolizing, is no longer there, and that's one of the premises of the pleomorphic theory of germs, is that the germ is nothing, the environment is everything. That it's the food source, the internal milieu, so to speak, which is what it's the space for it to operate in. So that's what we're talking about. And what's the other thing, and you might think this is interesting, Randy, those chaperoning capsules, they're different in prokaryotes than they are in eukaryotes. And eukaryotic cells are the cells that make up our body. The chaperoning capsules in eukaryotic cells, the ones that make up our body, the top of them, when it releases the protein, blooms open like a lotus. They have like molecular petals, you know, and there's just one, you know, and so I'm thinking, is this kind of a one-dimensional representation in 3 dimensions of, you know, I mean, you can really get kind of literal with the metaphor, you know, and thinking that you know, I mean, you cut the human body in half and you don't find the soul inside, but somehow it's inside. Somehow it's interpenetrated through every level. So, but if you cut a chaperoning capsule in half, you find a protein inside. But the question is, or at least one of the, what can lead to somewhat of a possible answer is that the cell is a three-dimensional representation of a multidimensional organization, of being an order of life. So you can have something be inside of something without being inside of it. When you get into like fourth dimensional things. So if there's a being that's living on flatland, right, and it's a little circle living on a piece of paper, if I press my thumb on that circle, right, here's a three-dimensional thumb pressing on the two-dimensional circle on flatland. Yeah. And the flatland circle is thinking, God, I'm feeling something inside of me. And his friends are like, oh, you're crazy. And I keep my thumb on it and until that circle lives out its life. And then it dies and its friends cut it open and don't find anything. Even though my thumb's right there, there's nothing inside of it. And in the same way, when you scale that up to higher dimensions, just the surface contact of my thumb on the piece of paper, my thumb was filling that circle in 2 dimensions, right? So you can have, I'll just try and skip right to it. The idea is that 2-dimensional surfaces they represent the boundary of 3-dimensional objects. Well, you have hypersurfaces of 4-dimensional objects are 3-dimensional. So the hypersurface, what's called a hypersurface of a tesseract, which is a 4-dimensional cube, the surfaces of that cube are 3-dimensional and volumetric in 3 dimensions. So the idea is that the human body is actually a 4-dimensional organism. And the physical part of it that we're seeing in 3 dimensions is actually the hypersurface, the inside hypersurface of a 4-dimensional organism. And that's where the soul incarnates. In the metaphor, we're basically just scaled up the metaphor to higher dimensions of me pressing on the inner circle of the flatland being. That was a tangent. I didn't quite mean to get off on there, but
it was a good one.
What I wanted to get to was that the incarnating into chaperoning capsules. So, you can read accounts of people who've had near-death experiences or even astral travelers, or people who, like Robert Monroe, for instance, describes seeing souls that are in like the subtle physical plane, just aggregates of them, just all together, and they're trying to rape each other and do heinous sexual acts.
You call those clusters, those groupings of
those are that's a misfolded protein, and they've been sequestered in ways in which their character deformations are specific. They're misfolded in certain ways, and they aggregate in the ways that they're misfolded. So you have character deformations that will go toward these heinous sexual acts, and you have the ones that are just want to murder each other, and you got people trying to murder, souls trying to murder each other. These are protein aggregates, and they're cytotoxic, and or at least that's what they map to in the cell. So what I thought was interesting when I started getting into all this is that chaperoning capsules, if the human being is some kind of chaperoning capsule for the soul, then chaperoning capsules are supposed to mitigate aggregation. But look at what we have. We have cytotoxic aggregates in 3 dimensions, on the 3-dimensional physical world, on the 3-dimensional plane that's Earth. You have urban sprawl as a result. You have major population centers and mega cities and stuff like this, and this can be viewed as aggregation, as protein aggregation, because they're, well, for one, they're cytotoxic. I mean, that's obvious. But where I was going with that is that the aggregation that happens just with the proteins is because the proteins are misfolded. But we're seeing chaperoning capsules aggregating together. So that means, if we're just playing with the metaphor and doing the mapping, that means that somehow the human body is misfolded. And then we start getting into, because if we're considering the soul as binding to the human body in such a way that a protein binds to the inside of a chaperoning capsule, we have to consider that the soul is at least as complex as the physical organism that it's binding to. And that the binding mechanism is either unknown or unrecognized, but it exists at the level of atoms. And the in the body make up biomolecules. So there's some aspect to, and we're talking about hormones, proteins, RNA, DNA, there's some aspect to the biomolecules that is exchanging some kind of force that we don't understand with the soul, and there's some kind of binding mechanism there. But to say that the chaperoning capsule is misfolded because we see it aggregating into these cytotoxic aggregates on the earth is to say that something about our genes, something about our genome is messed up somehow. And I don't know how that, I don't know in what way or how it happened or anything like that, but I'm just basing that off the assumption that, like I had just laid out, that the chaperoning capsule mapped to the human body, and that the chaperoning capsules in that sense are aggregating together. And is this some kind of part of the viral infection maybe, or something? I don't know, but I thought that was really interesting. So you have the chaperone capsules being a benefit to provide a surrogate developmental pathway for misfolded souls that are having trouble in the astral plane, but on the same token, the chaperone capsules themselves have been compromised in some way because you have them aggregating together and forming cytotoxic aggregates in the physical plane, and that's a problem. So, what do we... I don't know.
No, actually, I'm making a metaphor jump here because I think what we're all doing is, as one of us is talking, we're building our own imaginary picture of what this maps onto. When I think about a chaperone capsule that has a proper folded protein within it going onto a soul, I've often noted, just observationally, that many of us, and I'm not saying that any of us are there yet or anything, but have been doing the work of character building for this lifetime under extreme duress, are placed all over the planet. We're actually not aggregated. And it seems within that sort of thing, when you were talking about a properly folded protein, can move into a field at a certain level when it's got enough energy, because now we're talking soul power, not an oversoul. Not just an individual cell, but we can start to change that reality around us by an energetics of it. And that would seem almost like it was done on purpose. You know what I mean? Like there's some higher intelligence. We all keep so many people say, I want to get together, let's do a community, and all of that. I don't think we're ready for that, because...
No, I don't either. That's been a common complaint, is people go, we're so scattered, we're so far apart, we can't get together, we can't have contact. I have looked at this as a strategically, maybe divinely strategically placed assets scattered all over the place. I mean, intelligence operations operate like this. There are caches, there are places where you go, there's safe houses, there's secure vaults. Assets are scattered and secured in different places so that they're not targets. And the larger you become, the more of a target you become. So trying to build communities of any size right now simply means that we're aggregating, and we're probably aggregating with people who are insurgents into the system themselves. So as difficult as all this is, that's not to say there isn't community building. The community building is occurring on the field level. In other words, we have a field effect. We have the ability to communicate. At the same time, taking Jeffrey's biological metaphors, we're also out there as the white blood cells. We're out there as the chaperoning capsules to try and take care and clean up some of the damage that has been done. A lot of the things that we look at as negative right now, we have to turn that around and realize that's a situation we have, and make virtues out of some of these things and not be desperate, because a lot of the desperation I see is people who feel alone, and they feel alone in their soul, they feel alone in their ideals, and they feel very disenfranchised from the system at large. But that's part of the role that I see we have largely as the white cells in the system. Did we lose Claudia? Did she drop off? I hope not. You're muted, Christine.
Claudia's still with us. I think she's just,
Okay.
But I want to step it down one more level here too, because this is something that's been going on inside of my consciousness. It's a big woo-woo world out there on the internet, right? We've got channelers, we've got talking heads, we've got infinite love, we've got, people are going to take away your chakras, we've got people that are going to do these wonderful, magnificent things, right? Right? And there's disclosure, and it's always into the next. There's free energy, and it's always into the next, right? And so I realized, well, this goes with Emily. It's like, step it down into this grounded field that I'm on. I'm on the earth. I'm at a level with real people around me. And I know for me, and it's a confession of sorts, I got so out there for a while, I was super ineffective with the people in my own backyard, because nobody could even understand me, and I did have a new age elitism. Can we put that word out there? And so I was always talking down at them, and I understand that, because I don't like to be talked down to, right? None of us really likes that. So I'm working now within me. And this model that you're giving, Jeffrey, with biology is super helpful, as I'm trying to integrate all of that so that I can talk about real things with real people. Okay? If I go out there and I talk about, I get it. I mean, okay, yeah, I get it. I get the multidimensional. I get the whole thing of the perceiver which actually is building this reality. We're all beings that are subjectively creating our own reality. But I'm on the earth. I came here for, like you said, Randy, we're here for a reason. This didn't happen by accident, right? So in honoring that higher intelligence, it's telling me to stay grounded right now. Have these talks. Let's talk about multidimensionality. Let's continue to expand our consciousness. We're all capable of it. But also, and that's what I mean about what can one person do. That was the first thing I ever talked about on a YouTube video, was what can one person do? The little things. I mean, if we're not full-blown consciousness in the here and now moment, everybody we're talking to, we're not performing at the best level that we're capable of. It becomes that simple for me, and it's helping me keep it simpler and not get lost in the, oh my God. I mean, we're living in the most comic book aspects of creation right now. It's phenomenal. I actually, if I'm laughing at it right now. Sometimes I get really frustrated with it. Right now I'm laughing at it. I mean,
well, no, and I mean, look, I do the woo-woo stuff sometimes. I mean, that's all real. But, and you talked about Barbara Marciniak earlier, and I listened to a video of hers recently. There wasn't a recent video, but she said something profound. She said, if you want to do something important, go out and put your hands in the dirt, mow the grass, take out the trash. All of you are so stuck in the cycles of woo-woo and cosmic this and galactic that. There was this old saying back when I was, in Christianity, you're so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good. Well, there is some truth to that. When we get so caught up in ourselves that we are not practical anymore, we've actually failed. We've actually failed to do an outreach. We've actually failed to connect with people at the level where they live.
Yeah, this is such a vital thing, I feel like. And I'm not going to say guilty, but I've definitely, done the woo-woo thing, and I still do it, but I ground. The thing about grounding is that there's a way to go about it. That's again, it's integrative. If you're, Hypatia said that the best way for understanding, let me look it up real quick. To understand the things that are door is the best way to understand those that lie beyond. So, and that's exactly what we're talking about here. To understand the things that lie beyond, we first have to understand, what's going on here. And that has to do with, what you were saying, why do we, even pumping the gas, stuff like this, it seems so mundane, but like what was his name in Karate Kid? Mr. Moto, or
Yeah, Mr. Mota.
Mr. Miyagi.
Wax on, wax off.
Yes, exactly. And he was waxing on, waxing off, and he said, "What does this have to do with martial arts training? I'm not learning anything. You're supposed to be teaching me about these higher forms of martial arts." And he was complaining the whole time, but he kept doing it. He didn't understand. But the whole time,
so he did the whole thing, and then the movement all came into place.
Exactly, and this
all streamed from in here.
Totally, and that speaks to what we're talking about right now. You know, I mean, mowing the lawn, even pumping the grass, engaging in conversations that are I mean, meaningful, but also relevant to what's going on in the world. Because this is the best, understanding what's happening in the world right now is the best method for understanding and really grasping what's happening in these higher realms. So the whole idea of, you know, going out and having these astral experiences just for the sake of having an astral experience of meeting ET, you know, or going to do this or that, it's an ungrounded way to go about it until we understand how that integration relates to the world that we're supposed to be fully engaged in right now. And that's actually one of the, for my particular sensibilities and tastes, that's why I like metabiology so much, is because it's like the logic of it. I'm not necessarily relying on my own logic or anybody else's, but biology is a logic in and of itself. And it's one that's very empirical. You know, you can see the logic of biology at work under the microscope. The subjective part of it has to do with the mappings, of course, but there's ways to mitigate error even in that sense, where you can have mappings in one way, and then you can have mappings in a slightly different way, but the mappings in the slightly different way actually explain more than the mappings in the other way. And so, and they can change, and it's dynamic in that way, but still the logic of it is rooted in biology, which is an empirical science, and biology is, it's here, you know, it's now, and the stuff that happens with predator and prey relationships and parasites and pathogens and how to maintain health, and, you know, how organisms interact and what an ecosystem is and all this stuff. This is, I mean, and this is what's here right now for me, and that's why I like it so much. And I also, too, just to kind of, I just wanted to clear this up. Is that when I'm saying that the soul is like a protein, I'm not saying that that it's not a self-contained whole within itself. Like it relates to the larger body of which it is a part, like a protein relates to the larger body. That's not to say that it can't be, you know, it's an organism, you know, like saying the earth is like a cell. Well, it's actually like a superorganism, you know, because the life on earth is actually made up of cells. So it's just that much more complex than an actual cell. And the same thing with the human soul, I think, is organismic in a sense, but the way that it relates to the larger body, which is a part, is the same way that a protein relates to the larger body, which is a part. But that's not to say that at its core, it's not whole and complete in itself. That seemed like it was kind of, I didn't know exactly where to put that or when I was going to be able to say that, but I wanted to interject that alongside what I said about that.
Well, that gets into the fractal nature of how creation is, that in every organism and everything is a small piece of the whole. Mm-hmm. For me, is why when, you know, I don't know where we were looking at, somebody had written the other day, is like, you know, we need to look up because we're in these hyperdimensional spheres of creation, and we're in this multi, and I was thinking, no, how could one look up? I mean, we can see the stars, but we have to bring them down in. And that's another reason that, Jeffrey, I love so much is the work that you're doing, is because it's in, down inside is really the way through to understanding. Because if we're just looking at worlds within worlds spinning around and all doing their own things, we don't really get our connection to it. And I think a lot of people get lost, and that's that information that you were talking about, Randy, that so many people get lost in this. I mean, it's a real force. I have to exert a force to not get lost in the information.
A lot of what happens, too, is you get caught up in your own thinking about it. There's nights when, especially if I've done a show late, where I can't sleep. I can't get this stuff out of my head. Mm-hmm. And the best place to be at that point is to fold in, kind of, here we go with the chaperoning cell again. Fold in, get really still, get very quiet. Because all that noise out there, no matter how elegant it is not the essence of your information field, which is in here, expanding outward. We keep looking for things outside of ourselves. Everything is in here, everything unfolds from here, and everything returns to here. We are the universe. We are containing all of that, and we forget that. And I try to remind people, including myself a lot, that we are complete, and that when we can go inside of ourselves and find that I've always called it the still. It's just that place where you collapse in to a really small place, and it's really quiet. And that's the perfect moment. And that's where I try to take people so that they don't get lost in the noise. I'd like to hear what Claudia has to say, because I guess we're going to wrap this up soon. I'm soon going to have to jump off.
I call that process sweeping in front of my own front door. Because the cleaner we are, the better our vision gets. That's my experience.
Maybe this is a good place to end it with Claudia's voice and the quiet. I mean, when we really are very honest with ourselves, we're not finding the information out there. What we find out there is a projection of a lot of other beings' information. But there's nothing more soul satisfying than to have something emerge from within yourself in one of those silent moments. And for me, that is, call it knowledge, call it wisdom. It's a whole nother thing from information. So I really thank you, Jeffrey, for being with us today, and Claudia and Randy. And I really love what happens here is that a coherency develops out of the multi-streams that we are.
Yeah, I'd just like to say too, Randy, it was really nice to meet you. And Claudia, I haven't seen you in a while. It's good to see your face.
It's good to see you too. It's good to hear you. And we'll connect somewhere out there on the web, and maybe we can get together and expand the conversation as we will expand it here.
Yeah,
between ourselves.
I would love to, because it needs expansion. It's like unpacking something. We're unpacking, right?
Well, we are, and actually, I'm sitting here and I'm going, okay, so do I have where's my duct tape? Because my head's going to explode about any second now.
Yeah, we started getting going a little bit there. I started kind of feeling the excitement, and but I think this is probably a good place to tone it down. But there's definitely more conversations to be had.
And thank you, Christine, for being the person who kind of anchored and pulled people in together and made a space for this unique conversation, whatever we call it, whenever we meet again. It's kind of an awesome place.
It's definitely awesome. It feels good.